I call the meeting to order. Clerk will take a silent roll call of the Joint Legislative Oversight Commission on State Water Resources as we continue our investigation into the chemical spill that's occurred in Kanawha Valley from Freedom Industries. We now have several speakers with us today. One, we're going to go ahead and start with the gentleman that we were unable to get to because we ran out of time at the last meeting, Mr. Don Garvin, who's the legislative coordinator for the West Virginia Environmental Council. If Don would come forward and present.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Don Garvin, and good morning, members of the Commission. First of all, I want to commend the Commission for the Water Resource Protection Act amendments and the implementation of the Water Resource Protection Plan, the state plan. I've been there from the beginning on this law and have watched the progress that has been made. And we certainly need no better reminder, there's certainly no better reminder of the importance of water quantity and availability than this recent chemical spill. To that degree, water quantity is a water quality issue. I wasn't here for the spill. I was nursing a back problem at home in Buchanan, and I watched as things unfolded here with open jaw, and it reminded me of the time 15, 20 years ago when during the summer 50% of the Buchanan River's water flow was coming from the central treatment plant at the old Island Creek mine at 10 Mile near Sago. And with the water treatment, the water was so hard that coffee mate, non-dairy creamer, curdled in the coffee that I made with that water. And then I thought back to the 60s, and I was growing up, and there was a songwriter named Tom Lehrer who wrote for a show called That Was the Week That Was. And he wrote a song called Pollution. It's one of my favorites, and the first stanza goes, you can visit American City. You will find it very pretty. Just two things you must beware. Don't drink the water and don't breathe the air. So, I am, at this point in your investigation, we're also waiting for more information. I think most of the citizens of the valley and most of the citizens of the state are waiting for more information. They're by and large not drinking the water. By and large, they're using bottled water or going elsewhere and getting water. And I think that's because of not enough information. And I provided you a sheet on aluminum sampling that was done And this, believe it or not, I did not bring this up because of the water quality standards rule. Some sampling was done. I brought it up, bring it up as an example of importance and an example of the complexity of water regulation and determining water quality standards. These tests were done by Rob Goodwin, and they were for the aluminum testing for the, comparing it to the secondary water quality standards. Secondary water quality standards are non-enforceable federal standards that relate primarily to not to health impacts, but to odor, taste, and cosmetic things like ability to change your skin color or your teeth color. And using the DEP's data, he found that from 2011 to 2014, aluminum samples range from 0.02 parts per million, which is well within the range, to 2.6 parts per million, and 10 samples during that time frame exceeded the Secondary Safe Drinking Water Act standard for aluminum of 0.2. We need to be testing our water. One thing I'd like to point out is that all waters of the state of West Virginia have been placed in a category called Category A. And Category A is all streams in the state are in Category A unless they get a variance. And Category A means that that water is safe for drinking with standard treatment. And this has been the policy of state regulators back to when DNR was regulating our environmental programs back to 1960. That's been the policy of the state of West Virginia. There's no other state that I know of that has that kind of protection. So I also would point out that the Clean Water Act protects not only human health, but also aquatic life. And so I've yet to hear, and there were no fish kills that we saw related to this spill, but it'll be a while before we know if the materials that leaked have any impact on fish life, on other aquatic life, and it'll be a while before we have any kind of final knowledge of what the real total impacts to human health have been from this spill. The West Virginia Environmental Council feels that this is an ideal opportunity for the legislature and the DEP to enact legislation that is comprehensive and that protects all sources of all threats to source water. And I was pleased that Evan Hansen of Downstream Strategies presented his report to you. There's a lot of good information in that report. I recommend it to you. We'll get you another copy if you need it. But I want to go back to one of the pages quickly. That concerned the potential contaminant sources in the zones of critical concern for Charleston, Morgantown, and Huntington. Huntington's water supply has a total of 424 potential contaminant sources. And whatever legislation you finally come up with, I hope it will be comprehensive and not just deal with this storage tank or a few storage tanks. I'm particularly concerned about the exemptions that are in the bill that passed, and maybe we can work on that a little. But I'm at this point very interested in seeing your work pursued in this investigation so that we all have more information. And thank you for allowing me to address the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Garvin. Before I open up to members as far as questions, on the exemptions in the bill, it's our understanding that the reason for those exemptions is not to not have a facility covered, but it's already being covered by, or at least that's what we understand is being covered by other sections of the code, under other permitting programs and other even federal or state. I'd be interested as far as with your input and also the Environmental Council that if you find that one of those exemptions is not being covered, I appreciate if you would raise that to our attention, because that's not the intent. The intent was to make sure that all above ground storage facilities that hold any type of fluid except for water will be registered and inspected. If you find that one of these exemptions is creating another loophole, I'd ask that you bring that to our attention, because we do not intend for that to happen. And we can always take that exemption out if they're not being covered. But I know council, and we've tried to work very hard under the time of the urgency aspect of this as well, to make sure we get it right. So I didn't know if you identified already any, or you're looking at those to make sure that they're being covered under other types of programs. We're looking at the list now, Senator. My concern, and it's not necessarily shared by others, is that these scattered programs, no one will know where to go. They're not all under one roof, and my concern is that there be a place where you can go and find out all the information on all of the tanks, not just those covered under this law, and then you got to go to another building or another agency for those. And now on the enforcement part, I can understand that under the different laws that are involved here, most of which I've never dealt with, but I can understand that there would be different enforcement agencies. But in terms of a registration program, I think you want a solid database, universal database on those tanks. One other thing I forgot to mention, and
It's the one thing I really wanted to mention this morning, and that's the Chemical Safety Board recommendations from 2008, and then there was another set. Called for a hazardous chemical release prevention program to be established in the county, and those recommendations were really quite thorough, and nobody followed up on them. Nobody followed through on them, I think it's a good recommendation to follow through on that and create a hazardous chemical release prevention program.
Okay, Donald, two things. As council staff, first thing I'd like to try to look at is look at our exemptions and clearly lay out who covers them so that we know for sure. I want to know, I would like our commission to know that. And then also looking at is that information being shared among these agencies in such a way where it can be made available so people know what's going on.
So that it's useful.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and task the staff to start that. The second is I'd like to get a copy for the commission of all the Chemical Safety Board's recommendations of 2008. Mr. Garvin, they said they're going to come forward with other recommendations for this as it goes forward, but we can start working off of those recommendations as well. So if we get copies of those for our commission, that's a few points.
I would be glad to do that, Senator. I've wanted a complete list too, and all I have is bits and pieces, and so we will make sure you get that information.
You're talking about bits and pieces of recommendations? Bits and pieces of the recommendations,
yeah.
Well, anything that we, as this commission, it'll go up, be made available to the public. I believe we're having a website developed in order to those have the videos that are there for testimony as well as any documents we receive. So it's be available to the public, and we'll make sure that it's made available to you.
We'll do that right away.
Okay.
Thank you
very much. Any other questions from members? Delegate Hamilton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question would be to the committee and the chair. With the announcement a few days ago that the Scene Freedom Industries was to be dismantled by March 15th and cleaned up, I have a concern. We've got an ongoing investigation, and this gentleman that testified to our committee last Friday said it's going to be a year. I mean, should we, I don't know how to do the technical wording here, but I know it's not a crime scene, but if you had a crime, you would want to do your full investigation before you remediated the scene. And, should we as a committee draft a letter to the DEP and the governor's office that requests that they respectively back off until this investigation is at least further along?
I'll let other members be able to weigh in on that. Your point's well taken. The only thing is I think they're collecting all that right now. It'd be similar to having a murder victim where you take the pictures, but you don't just leave the body there for a year. You clean it up. So I believe it was my understanding yesterday, and I'm not gotten confirmation, it might be out in the press, but the feds had already yesterday even stormed the place and actually started the investigation. So I would say that we could probably draft a letter from this commission outlining our concerns to make sure that the full investigation and all evidence be referred to the former sheriff, Senator Laird, and the language of all that, since he's investigated many scenes like that. But to express your concern and our concern that evidence is not destroyed or somehow removed. But the other aspect of that, Delegate, that I thought you were going to get to, and you probably we were gonna get there, was, they've been asked to tear this down on March 15th. That facility still has chemicals in there. The question I have is, where are they gonna move that chemical? They tried to move it to nitro, I understand. The facility wasn't adequate, had holes in it, and people with nitro started complaining. And so where in West Virginia will they be moving this chemical to someone's backyard that could very well be leaking or spilling into someone else's drinking water without having Senate Bill 373 with the registration and inspections in place yet? That's also a concern. So with your advice on that, I'd like to include that with the letter to that committee if that's feasible for everyone.
Absolutely.
Is that okay for members, that we do a letter on behalf of the commission outlining those? Okay, so, council, yes. Co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd further like to request that we might provide a request to the governor, the DEP, to provide information as it arises in their investigation to the commission. Thank you.
Okay, no objection on that. Council and our clerk, do we get what we're trying to attempt to do, and at our next meeting? We'll circulate it among the members between now and then to get their feedback and buy-in, and then we'll present that. We'll go ahead and mail it out once we get buy-in, but we'll have it publicly discussed at the next meeting. Senator Walton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also would request that core samples be taken from the ground at the site to see what else may have leached into the ground, so that we can know what could be coming into our water supply as well. So we can kind of have a prevention type plan for whatever else we find in core samples underneath those tanks.
Good point. Well taken. Senator Miller.
I have a question, Mr. Garvin.
I'm sorry. Mr. Garvin had to say, I apologize, Mr. Garvin.
No,
We're
it's
just
fine.
discussing among ourselves here.
Being an old history major, I like to look what happened, it's important where we're going, but I like to see where we've been too. And I mentioned this yesterday too when I saw you in the hallway. I'm very curious, you mentioned the category A, meaning all of our waters are safe drinking water treatment. Who determines that we're category A?
Pardon?
Who makes the determination that our water is in category A?
All streams are category A unless that you get a variance from DEP.
Okay. I'm curious, we've talked a lot about DEP and their relationship in this. We've talked a lot about Chemical Safety Board, their relation. The water itself, my understanding the Federal Clean Water Act requires also DHHR to be involved, or Department of Health to be involved in a lot of information on our water.
The Safe Drinking Water Act would require DHHR to be involved. I don't believe DHHR is involved in administering the Clean Water Act.
I meant safe drinking water, I'm sorry. So they are to be involved in that process. Mr. Chairman, my concern is that we do have a real problem in this region with 300,000 people. But I think we also have kind of concern, and I think that we're talking about water, if we look where we've been, to look where we're going, we need DHHR involved in water treatment in Greenbrier County, where we have groundwater in some water systems. We need them involved in Wyoming County, as we heard on the floor yesterday, where people have not had water since September that they can drink without boiling. And I think we need to look at their responsibility in this too. Where were they in the activity that took place? And I'm not picking on DHHR. I'm asking where they were, and we haven't heard from them in this project. I haven't heard much about that. I've heard a lot from Kanawha County Board of Health, which has done a great job of giving information to us with questions.
As I understand it, I'll have to update myself on this, but when I was trying to put together legislation that involved DHHR, and I understood them to say then they had only one environmental epidemiologist on staff. Maybe that's here in Charleston, but DHHR used, Barb Taylor at DHHR used to come to all the Environmental Quality Board meetings on water quality standards, setting water quality standards. And once the legislature removed EQB from its rulemaking authority, or from rulemaking authority, DHHR may be making some comments on proposed rulemaking, but they're not at attending meetings anymore. I have a piece of legislation that I proposed the last 4 or 5 years that would require DHHR to do an assessment, a public health impact assessment of proposed changes in water quality standard rules and air quality standard rules. And I think it got sidetracked because they felt that they were going to have to do testing and all that. All I wanted them to do was a literature search, and so that the legislature would know what it was voting on when it voted to change water quality standards. And I'm still pursuing that, and I think, Senator, you'll make sure that bill gets reintroduced for me.
Thanks for the extra work. Also, you mentioned, if I ask one more question, and I want to request from the chair very quickly, but I read something right after this leak, and I have not found it since then, about the mud and the ooze in the river and the half-life of chemical in that. And I think Johnny Banks talked about moving down the river, but I would be curious if we have that information, what's sitting in the bottom now, based on what has leaked, what's been absorbed down in the muck of the river. I don't know what kind of mussels live in the upriver, which are filters of water. If there's going to be studies done on that, and I don't know if that's a question for you or not.
Well, I think it's an important question. Several years ago, you all might recall, they dredged the Kanawha out here, and all kinds of stuff was buried down in that and was stirred up and then dispersed downstream as they went, and it's
Well, I guess my question.
it's a good issue. I mean, it's
You have that literature. I read that right when this happened, and I haven't seen it since then. You have that information someplace, or if you,
I may have the article, but I can go back and get it.
if you have it, I'd like to see it, if I could, please. And Mr. Chairman, I just would request that DHHR at some point address our committee also.
Yes, thank you. We also have a call in to DEP. I want to invite Mr. Garvin. So we will invite them, DHHR, hopefully we can get them in here next week when we meet, along with DEP and emergency management. Mr. Garvin, you've stimulated a lot of thought, discussion here. We appreciate your testimony here and your ideas. Any further questions for Mr. Garvin at this point? Not, Delegate or Co-Chair Minnick.
One or two questions, Mr. Chairman. You had mentioned the proposal that the Chemical Safety Board had recommended on the hazardous release prevention program. Was that one of the recommendations that came from downstream strategies as well?
I don't believe downstream strategies got so far with their study, and then had the Chemical Safety Board recommendations next to consider, and they didn't get to do that before they had to finish the report. So
Okay, most of their recommendations came from the Board of Public Health, wasn't it?
say again,
Their
Mike.
recommendations coming from the Board of Public Health?
I'm not positive of that.
One last.
Most of their recommendations probably involve the Board of Public Health.
One last question is, what further recommendations would the West Virginia Environmental Council recommend for improving the regulations that we're trying to impose to protect the water of West Virginia?
We're developing that list.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, thank you, Mr.